Welcome to the BreathWorks Podcast. Breathe better, perform better. I'm Mahesh Kumar, your host and guide in this journey to supercharge your athleticism, skyrocket your productivity, and boost your overall well-being. Let's get started. All right, guys, welcome to the BreathWorks Podcast, where we breathe better and perform better. Today, I'm ecstatic to be having Erin Dahlgren with me. Don't be fooled by her Swedish last name. She's actually a proud Aussie, but living in Sweden and spending some time in Florida. She's been a singer, she started when she was 13. And her world of singing got her into conscious breathing. And because obviously as a singer, you're using a lot more of your lungs and your breath. You need to be, able to go up and down. So your breathing is such an important part of your singing. So she's been doing that for a bunch of years, where she also met her lovely husband. She's a mother of two lovely daughters today. And the last couple of years, she's been diving deep into the world of, breathing even more. And she has worked with our Hale Breathing Center in Stockholm, run by our friends, Johnny. And she's a breath guide certified trainer as of, last year. And for the last 12 months, you've been working in Florida, Erin, working with, different types of people, corporates on one side, working with individuals to help them perform better, help them get out of stress, help them calm their minds down, find more focus. So I'm ecstatic, Erin, to have you on this podcast. Why don't you add some more color to that introduction and tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, so I first was introduced to specific breathing techniques through my training as a vocalist, and I began as a classical vocalist. So a lot of my training was actually breathing. Very often we would breathe for close to 30 minutes before we would sing a single note in my lessons. So I was really fortunate to have wonderful instruction, and a lot of that was based on proper diaphragmatic breathing and increasing the strength of my diaphragm. Now, one thing that I realized recently actually was that I had suffered from asthma as a kid, and that went away about age 13, and we just sort of figured that I'd grown out of it. But looking back, I'm curious as to whether the introduction of some of these conscious breathing techniques had an impact on my health, in that it helped me with getting rid of the asthma symptoms. But then training through my career with singing, the focus was really on being able to take an efficient breath, and a breath that allowed me to sustain the voice in an optimal way. So it wasn't until a couple years ago, when I was introduced to breathwork here in Stockholm at Hale Center, that I started to put two and two together and realize that much of what I had done as a singer in my early years is actually breathwork, and related very closely to what I've been studying more recently.
That's fascinating. If you've not read, I'm sure you've read James Nestor's work around breath, and he speaks a lot about asthma and allergies as something that breathing, there's new science that shows that breathwork clearly helps. So you're another testament to that story. Tell us, let's start with your career as a vocalist. What kind of breathworks or what kind of breathing were you accustomed to back then, and how did that help your performance and in your career?
Well, lots of different techniques as part of a warm-up. So like any muscle, you need to warm up your diaphragm. It started mostly with understanding the breathing mechanisms and how it actually works, and how the diaphragm contracts downwards. And in order to allow its space to move downwards, you need to release a lot of tension in the abdominal area to create that space. So I think, we've been taught to sort of suck our stomachs in and keep our torso nice and taut, and our core held really tightly, which doesn't allow for optimum breathing, because it then sort of forces us to breathe with our shoulders and our neck and our chest quite high up. So letting go of some of that unlearning and realizing that you need to release that tension was a big part of it, so that you can take really large breaths and intake a lot of air very quickly. So a lot of it was focused on that, and on strengthening the diaphragm through various exercises. As well as, looking back, there was quite a bit of CO2 tolerance training as well, in order to hold the notes as long as possible without feeling like you need to gasp for air.
Let's unpack that a little bit. So for For the person that's completely not in tune with what the diaphragm is or where it is and how that functions, why don't you give us like a 60-second crash course of diaphragm and how that affects our breathing capacity? And then I want to talk about the CO2 tolerance, which is also very exciting.
Yes. Well, our diaphragm is our largest breathing muscle, and it's sort of a dome-shaped muscle that exists sort of underneath the rib cage. It's attached to the bottom of the lungs and separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity. So when it contracts downwards, it actually pulls the bottom of the lungs downwards with it, which creates a larger volume in the lungs. So think of a medicinal syringe being pulled, that when you pull the plunger back, it creates a vacuum within the syringe, causing air, or medicine in that case, to rush in. It's a bit like that. As it contracts downwards, it creates more space in the lungs, causing air to rush in. So the more you can strengthen that diaphragm and the more you can create space for it to contract downwards, the more lung volume you're going to have, in addition to the intercostal muscles which are pulling the rib cage out, also creating a larger space in the lungs, sideways and back. So sort of 360 breathing, as we call it.
Right. So the breathwork sort of transcends your rib cage. You open your ribs, you expand throughout your 360 degrees, as you mentioned. And I guess diaphragm, given you mentioned it's a muscle, you can strengthen it, do resistance training with it, which is really what you're doing, right? So tell us a little bit more. When you say removing pressure, what do you actually mean, and how does that anatomically impact your diaphragm and your ability to breathe?
So removing pressure in, what you want to do is let go of the tension in your belly, allowing the belly to move out so that all the organs, the viscera in the abdominal cavity, can move out of the way, allowing for that diaphragm to move down as completely as possible. So it really is just about releasing tension in the belly. Let the belly hang out. Not really, but just we're starting a new trend here.
Let the belly hang out. Let the belly hang out. That's not no more beach body. Let the belly hang out. The diaphragm beach body 2024. No, it's all right. So you can resistance train the diaphragm, and it's clear that a lot of us are not taught how to breathe, which sounds very weird when you talk about it that way. But the fact of the matter is that you learned this as a singer. Otherwise, there's a high probability you'd have never learned the technique, which, like, for instance, I've never learned the technique till I started working with women's pelvic floors and realized there's something called the diaphragm, and working with the diaphragm can help your pelvic floor prolapse, for instance. You start recovering from symptoms of that, which is what my introduction to it. But tell us a little bit more about how does it feel when you work with your diaphragm, and how does it feel when you do this the right way versus the wrong way?
It's a good question. Firstly, I'd like to say that it's less about learning and more about unlearning, because we're all born with the ability to breathe that way. If you look at a baby, the way that they breathe, their belly is rising and falling. It's such a beautiful thing to watch. So somewhere along the way, we're taught different habits that are not necessarily beneficial for us, that are related more to that shoulder breathing and high sort of upper chest breathing. So it's really about letting go of bad habits as opposed to learning new ones. Well, it's a bit of both. But what that can look like initially is actually pushing the belly out. Now, that's not what we're hoping for as the end product. What we want to see is the belly moving out the way as a product of the diaphragm moving downwards, as opposed to using the muscles to push the belly out. But a lot of us have what's called reverse breathing, or some people have reverse breathing, where when we breathe in, our belly sucks in, and when we breathe out, the belly releases, whereas we want to see the opposite. So when you're inhaling, the belly is coming out to create that space, and when you're exhaling, the belly's going back in. So in the beginning, it can feel a bit like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, trying to get the coordination right in order to have the belly expand as you inhale and contract as you exhale. So it can take a little bit of practice getting that flow right. And if that means pushing the belly out deliberately, and what you can do as an exercise to do that is actually lay on your back and place a book, perhaps a heavy book, or if you're working with children, sometimes it can be nice to place a soft toy, a favorite toy on their belly, and just see if you can get it to rise as you inhale and then full as you exhale. And just finding that motion and focusing on that up and down can be a great way to start.
Right. So lie on your back, put a book or a little toy if you're dealing with a small child, for instance, on his or her belly or on your own belly, and you breathe so that the little book or the toy rises up. And do you sort of have a 4 seconds in, hold down, or how would it? Is there any sort of cadence to follow?
I would follow a comfortable cadence. 4 seconds would be a good place to start, but it might be 3 or it might be 5. Just focusing on the rhythm, and nice even rhythm of having it rise and fall in the beginning is a great way to start, yes.
Brilliant. So that's a great way to know that you're activating your diaphragm and you're breathing all the way back into your ribs, all the way back into the cavities behind. So that's the 360 breath that you spoke about, Erin.
Yes. So that's the next step, actually, would be to actually place your hands on your hips and see if you can start to feel some of that activation in the lower rib cage and even in the back with your thumbs out the back, and see if you can feel it in all different directions.
Right. So the thumbs, if you're doing it right, the thumbs sort of expand and go in. Is that right?
Yes. So the thumbs, you should feel that expansion outwards as you inhale and then back in. And you can actually practice that to a point where you can identify the muscles one by one as you breathe and focus on increasing space in one area over another. But that can take a little time.
Yeah. Lateral breathing. Is that called lateral breathing, right? Yeah. Few names for it. I'm accustomed to calling it lateral breathing. So lateral breathing takes time because it feels kind of weird initially. I've been doing lateral breath for about 1.5 years now, and now it just feels like the most natural way to breathe. But anyway, enough about me. Coming back to you, Erin, you spoke about CO2, and recently when I was going through new studies about breathing, I realized that a lot of us, when we are trying to gasp in air, are opening our mouths, to try to get in air. But really what's happening is that enough oxygen is not being released to your blood and to your tissues, and carbon dioxide is getting stuck. So literally you're doing the opposite of what you should be doing. So I'm very, very curious to hear when you sort of in passing mentioned, when you were practicing as a singer, about your CO2 tolerance. And so please tell us a little bit more. What do you mean by it? And what was it for you when you were singing about balancing your CO2 and yeah.
Definitely. So I think many people can relate to what you're saying, and it becomes almost like a vicious cycle, because the way that we breathe creates breathlessness, and we try and breathe more to overcome that. But in actual fact, just as you say, we're creating more challenges. Up to 90% of us are overbreathers, meaning, like you said, that we're breathing more than what our bodies need and creating an imbalance in the level of oxygen and carbon dioxide, which then leads to the less oxygen reaching the cells. So it's quite counterintuitive, but in order to get more oxygen, we often need to breathe less and focus on pulling back that urge to overbreathe in order to balance the pH levels in the body. Now, what that means for a singer is often, depending on the style of singing that you're doing, often there's plenty of air in the lungs in order to sustain those notes. It's the fact that carbon dioxide is rising as you sing because you're not expelling it with an exhale, and since carbon dioxide drives the urge to breathe, you reach a point where you feel like you need to take a breath even though you've still got air left to continue sustaining the note. So part of that training is learning to feel okay with that discomfort of that urge to breathe, knowing that you have plenty of air left to go. So that can look like, CO2 training, CO2 tolerance training, or air hunger training is becoming more popular in various athletic circles as well as performance. But it can look like focusing on nose breathing, for example, more than mouth breathing. Obviously, as a singer, we need to take in huge amounts of air very quickly, so there's a lot of mouth breathing. But even focusing on humming through songs can increase CO2 tolerance.
Can I ask you there, Erin? You mentioned as a singer, you're forced to sort of open your mouth to breathe. To take in a lot of air faster. Is that really how it works? That mouth being the larger sort of opening, there's more air going in, and hence you take in more, or is it a myth that it actually works like that?
I would say in life, generally, I would recommend that people definitely focus on nose breathing, but there are a couple of occasions when mouth breathing is more efficient, and singing is one of them. It's just a faster way of getting a lot of air. Having said that, it also can dry out your vocal cords really quickly. So generally when warming up, I would focus on sort of semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, meaning humming, lip trills, things that don't have you opening your mouth quite so far so early in your warm-up, and then leave the mouth breathing for the performance.
Right. What kind of singing, what kind of songs, or what kind of genre of songs were you doing in your career?
Mostly musical theater, so Broadway shows.
Oh, wow. What was your style?
I started off as a classical singer in high school, and then when I went to musical theater school, performing arts college, I learned a more modern belt technique. So I was definitely in a lot of the rock operas and rock musicals and pop.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. And Erin, you were singing on a beautiful cruise line. That's when you met your husband, right? So songs can take you far, hey. So tell us a little bit about your breathing works today. So you started off when you were 13. That's when you were introduced to the world of breathworks. Asthma disappeared magically. Nobody knows why. Clearly, we know there's a correlation between your breathwork and potentially what happened. And you've been doing that for the last 2.5 decades. And now you've sort of taken it to the next level. Tell us a little bit more about your breathwork certification, what that entails, and tell us a little bit more about how you work today.
So I, as I mentioned, I discovered Hale Center when I moved to Stockholm, and I'd been on my own healing journey at that point, and breathwork was such a profound experience for me, such a powerful experience in terms of accessing my own authenticity, for lack of a better way of describing it, sort of peeling off all these layers. And so I immediately felt like I needed to know more. So I started their level 1 breath guide certification program. And as part of that, the unique thing I think about Hale is that rather than focusing on one specific genre or modality of breath work, they sort of take a lot of different modalities, a lot of different techniques, both ancient and modern, from around the world, and give their breath guides an understanding of what these techniques are, how they work in the body, and what they can be used for, what the benefits are. And then they sort of put them all together and bring them in a way that's really accessible for anyone. So breath work in general is not a one-size-fits-all. We all have different habits, different needs, different techniques that benefit us in different ways. So through understanding all these techniques, you can sort of look at the individual, or an individual can come and take a class that is specifically relaxation techniques, or specifically techniques that are going to activate the body and provide energizing and calm, or specifically techniques that focus on CO2 tolerance training. And you have all that at your fingertips in a really accessible way. So I've thoroughly enjoyed learning about that, and I feel like I'm a sponge as an adult learning all this new information. It's been a really exciting process, actually.
Beautiful. Can you break that down, Erin? So we're talking about breathing. Everybody who's listening to it is breathing. So what does it mean? Because sometimes I feel there's a tendency for us to overcomplicate what breathing really is. So if you break down sort of your learnings, as a sponge-filled adult, the last, what you've been doing the last few years, what would sort of the basic principles of breathing be? You covered, I'm sure, a couple of points already, but it's worth repeating, I'm sure. So what would you say are the basic principles of good breath work that would take you long, whatever your outcomes you're looking at?
Well, to me, breath work really starts, before we manipulate the breath or take control of anything, it really starts with becoming aware of the breath. That's step one. So many of us move through life without any conscious awareness of what our breath is doing. Our breath changes according to how we feel, the state of our nervous system, what kind of emotions or triggers we're experiencing. And without that understanding of what our patterns are and what our habits are, we can never think to use the breath to change anything. So the first step is really becoming aware of the breath. And there are some really simple techniques, just sitting with the breath and listening to it and noticing it and becoming aware of all the tiny little nuances that happen with it. Even that exercise alone can be incredibly powerful. And that's before we even start to take control of it. In fact, I've used simple breath awareness techniques to help my daughter, who's 11, to fall asleep at night, because traditionally she would take 2 hours to fall asleep. And now, just through using some body scanning and some breath awareness techniques, she's able to get to sleep usually within 5 or 10 minutes. So that alone is really powerful.
Wow, that's revolutionary for any new moms or dads listening to the podcast. So that's regular body scanning. Would that can you elaborate a little bit more on how do you make your 11-year-old fall asleep in a matter of minutes rather than hours?
Sure. I mean, there's a range of techniques, as I say, ranging from just listening to the breath and understanding it and checking in with the body, because one of the most powerful things about breath work is creating a sense of presence, living in the present moment, as opposed to listening to those constant thoughts and overthinking and anxiety that we all deal with, especially at night for some of us. So it can be as simple as just listening to the breath, but also when you start to add in a body scanning technique in addition to that. So focusing first on the feet and the sensations around the feet, maybe some muscle contractions, squeezing the muscles, creating tension, and then letting go in order to soften as you go, and then slow, deep breathing as you move from body part to body part, working your way up from the feet, through the legs, the hips, all the way up to the facial muscles. It works like a charm for her.
Beautiful. And is that you sitting next to her on the bedside and guiding her? Is that what happens?
Initially, yes. So I would do that every night, and it took about, I would say, 3 weeks for us to get her into that practice, because it's not enough to just sort of do it once off and think that that's going to end all our problems. The nervous system starts to recognize the patterns and go, okay, I associate this with a sense of calm and safety, and starts to increase its efficiency in that it takes less and less time to get into that mode. So initially, yes, I sat with her on the bed and we would do that every night. But at this point, she's able to start doing that herself and guiding herself through that process. So,
wow, well done. Super mom here. All right, so back to principles. So being aware of your breathing pattern and sitting with your breath and understanding what's going on is a good first step to sort of calm the anxious mind. What else is good principles of breathing that we should follow?
Well, the next step is after observing the breath and understanding what's happening, it's changing the breath and starting to create patterns that create safety. I know for me, when I'm in a very stressful situation or a high pressure situation, if somebody says to me, just breathe or take a deep breath, I just want to punch them in the face, like it's just not going to work. So by bringing breathwork techniques into your life on a regular basis and understanding how that makes you feel, so it may be that perhaps what we call circular connected breathing, that is breathing in and out without any pauses in between, makes you feel quite energized and focused and calm. Or maybe a breath hold starts to relax your body and take you to different places of creativity, or perhaps slow, even breathing, like coherent breathing, balances your nervous system and really creates a nice slow heart rate. Yes.
Can I just pause you there? And sorry, what does a breath hold?
Breath hold is holding your breath. So that can be taking a nice deep breath in and holding the breath at the top of the inhale, or it can be exhaling the air out, letting it land in a nice comfortable place, and doing what we call a breath retention there, holding on the exhale. So, and that can be challenging, definitely, for some people in the beginning, depending on the type of breathing that you're doing leading up to that. It sounds like a long time, but if you're doing, for example, some conscious connected breathing, some circular connected breathing beforehand, you're actually expelling a lot of carbon dioxide as you breathe in that way, meaning your carbon dioxide level is much lower. So when you go to hold your breath and the carbon dioxide level starts to rise gradually, it's going to feel much easier than if you weren't doing that type of breathing beforehand.
Right. So back to the principles then. So we speak about sort of being aware of your breathing. We've spoken about understanding when you might need to hold your breath to sort of feel that you're getting back to your focus, or getting away from anxiety, or getting back into sleep. Anything else that you want to add to sort of the basic principles here?
No, just to finish that thought, once you start understanding how these different breathwork techniques make you feel, when you're in a state of calm and relaxation and no pressure or low pressure situations, you can start to draw upon that knowledge in the high pressure situations, knowing how those breaths are going to make you feel. Your nervous system, as I said, starts to respond more quickly the more you practice. And I've seen this in kids as well, and it's something I'm really passionate about, is bringing breath work into schools and into kids' lives at a younger age so that they have those regulation techniques. Having said that, it's also equally important for us as adults to be able to regulate, because so many of us just didn't learn that.
I understand. You mentioned a couple of times different breathing techniques. So I'm going to throw situations at you, and you're going to pick your favorite technique and maybe explain it if you have to, if you feel it's not as easy to understand. Let's take the time to do that. I'm going to throw you at different scenarios, Erin. Okay. So you wake up in the morning and you realize that your alarm you've snoozed off your alarm a couple of times and you're a little late. What is your perfect? It's high stress. You have a meeting at 8, and what's the technique you'd go to sort of get your feet there?
Oh, that's a good question. I think if I was waking up already in a state of panic, I'd be looking for something that was definitely going to balance my nervous system a little more, giving me both the energy and the focus I need to get to work on time, but also not go into that place of fight or flight. So one of the most I think user-friendly and accessible techniques, which is getting a lot of traction lately, is box breathing, which you may have heard of. So generally we would say you're breathing in a box. So you might choose a 4-second count, for example. So you're inhaling through the nose for 4 seconds, holding the breath at the top for 4 seconds, exhaling through the nose or mouth for 4 seconds, and then holding again for 4 seconds, because that's going to really start to balance the nervous system. And it's something that's easy to remember and easy to draw upon in those moments of stress, for sure.
Beautiful. So that's a 4 seconds inhale. So it rises up, and then you're holding for 4 seconds.
Yeah, it's the top of the box, yes.
Right. You're exhaling for 4 seconds, and you're holding for 4 seconds. Beautiful. And how many cycles of that do you do?
It depends. Even 3 cycles of that can have a significant effect in my experience. It might take a little more, but yeah, just a few moments of that.
So in a minute and a half, you're in a much different state compared to how you got into it. So Erin, is it okay if I promise this to our listeners? You can do this, after the podcast, but you do a 3-cycle guided box breath for our listeners that I'm going to put in the description below. You can add it to your website too if you have the opportunity to do that, so people can find your work. But otherwise, just listening to your voice and doing this box breath and getting trained for a scenario like this might be very useful. So is it okay if I say you'd be able to do a guided box breath 3x3, getting in and getting out of that? Would that be fine for you? Beautiful. All right. So you're going to find Erin guiding you through the box breath in the link in the description below. That's brilliant. So let's go into the next scenario, Erin. So I'm an athlete. I'm going to run the marathon. It's the Boston Marathon today morning. The marathon starts in about 2 hours. I'm getting ready. What's the breathing technique that you would recommend me to get into mode, get into focus, to visualize me crossing the line?
That's a good question. Okay, there's so many techniques that I would bring in certainly throughout the training period. But we're not talking about the training period. For example, I would definitely, you see a lot of athletes these days taping their mouth shut to train, which is a great way to start to focus on that CO2 tolerance.
Let's do this scenario. This is even better. All right. So I'm an athlete. I'm going to run the Boston Marathon in 8 weeks. Okay. How can I use breathing to improve my performance or recover faster or improve my endurance? What would your go-to technique be?
So yes, I would definitely say starting to work on that CO2 tolerance training several weeks before. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of athletes that we're seeing taping their mouths in order to sort of restrict the amount of breathing that they're able to do. Obviously, we spoke about earlier, breathing through the mouth allows you to breathe in a lot more air, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way to breathe in order to get increase our VO2 max. VO2 max being the maximum rate of oxygen that our bodies are consuming during intense exercise. So by taping the mouth, it forces nose breathing, which is going to just restrict the amount of air you can bring in. And ideally, over several weeks, usually it's about 6 weeks, as I remember, the body starts to adapt really well to having less oxygen and becomes a more efficient breathing mechanism. So you're expending less energy on the process of breathing and actually receiving more oxygen to the cells. So that would definitely be a good place to start in my experience.
Right. So you're 8 weeks out into your race. The technique here is to tape your mouth with a regular surgical tape, right? And that adds resistance to your breathing, and that forces you to breathe through your nose and not through your mouth. And that sort of balances your VO2 and VCO2, which is rate of oxygen coming into your blood flow. So the technique there is to tape your mouth and train the whole time with your mouth taped. Is that what you suggest?
It might be a several step process in order to achieve a full marathon with the mouth taped, but yes, I would say starting there and seeing how long you can go, and then increasing ideally that time with the mouth taped along your training.
That's the way to do it. So, all right. So tape your mouth and do it successively. Don't rush into it, obviously. See how it feels. And that's a large part of this whole breathing concept is you need to tune in. Remember principle number 1 from Erin, tune in and check in with your breath, right? So that's brilliant. So, all right. So we have that scenario. Let's come into the scenario. It's race day today. You're waking up and, you're looking at your race starting in a couple of hours. You're ready to get going. What's the technique you recommend people to get to?
Yeah, so right before the race or 2 hours before, let's see, I'm guessing you're dealing with some nerves. So probably anything that's going to involve elongating the exhale right up until the race starts is going to be a super efficient way to just sort of calm the nerves factor and leave you nice and focused. But in terms of athletic performance and endurance, a series of breath holds, really soft, not necessarily really long breath holds because you don't want to tire out the body, but breath holding can stimulate red blood cell production, which also, enhances the oxygen carrying capacity and reduces sort of the blood stealing effect of your legs feeling really tired. So I would definitely look at doing some breath holding, perhaps 5 breath holds, increasing just a little bit each time.
Can you take us through a cycle of that? What would that be?
Yes, I would do some slow in and out breathing, maybe 3 nice, slow, conscious breaths, focusing on nice, deep diaphragmatic involvement, in and out through the nose, and then holding the breath, probably on the exhale at that point, actually, and maybe just 30 seconds, the first one, the next one, maybe 45 seconds or 50 seconds, increasing it by 20 seconds, maybe a series of 5 breath holds, increasing by 20 to 30 seconds as you go, depending on your body's capabilities, just to start to increase.
Right. So you're inhaling, you're holding, you're exhaling, and you're holding again?
Yes, so taking maybe 3 or 4 nice, slow, deep breaths, but about 30 seconds in between to recover, in and out through the nose, in between each breath hold. Yes.
So, all right. So you go in through the nose, 3 to 4 deep breaths. Then you hold your breath, right? And then you exhale. Is that right?
Yes, exhaling nice and smooth through the nose is the best way to go. Once you start getting that feeling like you need to gasp, we're probably pushing it a little too much.
Right. Exciting. All right. Let's do one last scenario role play here. Okay. And that is, I'm a 45-year-old getting into a stressful meeting. I have a presentation to make. This could really jumpstart my, or parachute my career, or this could derail it for a few years. It's pretty high stress, So what's the technique here?
Well, it's interesting you give me that situation. My husband had that situation recently where he had to make a big speech, one of the most important speeches of his career. And he said to me afterwards that he had used one of my breathing techniques to help calm himself down, which I felt quite proud in that moment, both of him and of myself for having gifted him that.
Well done. Well done. What a cliffhanger.
Exactly. So the technique that he used was what's known as triangle breathing or 4-7-8 breath. And it's, again, a really nice technique just to slow down, to activate the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. That is the side that's for rest and digest. But it also enhances sort of cognitive abilities and keeps you nice and focused and clear. So that technique involves breathing in through the nose for 4 seconds, holding at the top of your inhale for 7 seconds, and then breathing out through the nose for another 8 seconds, or through pursed lips is another nice way to do it, like you're blowing out a candle.
Right. So for those that are not watching the podcast but listening to the podcast, can you explain the concept of pursed lips and the triangle breathing patterns again, please?
Yes, so pursed lips is like blowing out a candle. So you could even hold one finger out in front of you. I do this with my children all the time. And just blow gently on your finger as though there's a candle flame there, and you're just trying to make it dance in front of you without blowing it out completely. So a nice, gentle, slow, even breath for the 8 seconds exhale is a nice way to think of it.
Right, so 4 inhale, 7 hold, and 8 exhale. Can you make that a 6, 7, 12 too? Can you sort of double the inhale and exhale count, the ratio?
Absolutely. So with any of these exercises, including the box breathing and the 4-7-8, if these counts are a little too slow for you or a little too fast for you, you can always adapt them to your own needs or count a little slower, whatever it is that you need. Sometimes, depending on the state of your nervous system, you might only have 3 seconds, or one day you might have 10 seconds. It really depends on the day.
Beautiful. Erin, I'm going to ask you for a favor. For those that are listening, do you have any place where they can find you guiding them through the triangle breathing technique, for instance, or are we going to create one?
Yes, we should definitely create one of those as well and have it accessible. So my website does have some breathing programs available on it at engagebreathwork.com.
Right. While we are at it, tell us a little bit more about where people can find more about you and how you spend time these days coaching customers or clients to achieve more with breathing.
Yes. So while I do guide virtually at Hale Center in Stockholm through their app, I also have my own company based in South Florida in Miami. My company is Engage Breathwork. My website is engagebreathwork.com. And through that, I do online classes as well as in-person workshops in the local area, private sessions. And I am available for retreats, online workshops, basically anything.
Wonderful. So that's Engage, ENGANGE, Engage. breathworks.com, and that's where people can find you doing live classes, so they can sign up for these live classes, right? They can find you doing workshops, and they can find you to work with them as a coach.
I was going to say, I'll tell you what, I'll send you a promo code as well that you can give your customers so that they can get 50% off any of my class packages.
Oh, that's brilliant. If you didn't hear that, you get 50% off to try working with Erin. That's brilliant, Erin. You're very generous. So finishing off here, Erin, what are you most excited looking ahead? What are you excited in terms of, breathing techniques permeating, people's psyche here and getting more and more common, that people are getting more aware of how they breathe. People are getting aware of the power of, proper breathing. What are you excited about when you think about the future?
I am excited. That's a really great way to put it. I'm really excited. The more I see breathwork sort of permeate the collective consciousness, the more I feel that there's hope for the future. I feel personally, breathwork has enabled me to connect to myself and other people in a way that I didn't have the tools to do before. And by introducing that to other people, and particularly, as I mentioned, to children, we're giving them the tools to be able to connect more completely, more wholesomely to themselves, to their bodies, to their regulation techniques, to their emotions, even just the ability to breathe through uncomfortable emotions as opposed to suppressing them. I think it's just going to have exponential rewards for the world. So when we start to consciously access techniques that are relaxing and calming, it changes the way that we not only view the world, but the way that we create the world. We become more compassionate about our stories, about the way that we think about ourselves and other people. And I think that's just one of the greatest gifts that we can give to our children. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I don't think we can end the podcast on a better note. So thank you, Erin, for your time. Thank you for all the amazing work you do. And we're really excited to follow your career and to look at all the impact you're about to make, if not already. And again, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well done, Erin. I'm going to pause the recording here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the BreathWorks Podcast. Breathe better, perform better. We hope you're feeling pumped up and ready to take on any challenge today. If you did enjoy this episode, leave a review or share this with a friend who you think might find this body of work useful. Breathing is so simple yet profound. So thank you once again for joining me today. And until next time, keep breathing.